Hello everyone, and welcome to Fresh Master Channel. Today, we are going to have some story from Reddit. But before we start, don't forget to subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it, and leave a comment down below. These simple clips mean a lot to the future of this channel.
Before meeting Cindy, my life was fairly uncomplicated. Coming from a modest, hardworking family, I grew up understanding the value of self-reliance. My parents always stressed solving problems on your own rather than leaning on others, and that philosophy stuck with me as I pursued an engineering degree at Florida State University. It was a tough but rewarding experience, and I was determined to make my family proud by being the first to graduate. In my first year of college, I focused heavily on my studies and worked part-time to help pay for tuition. My social life took a back seat, but that didn't bother me. I always believed personal sacrifice was part of achieving success. Then, in my second semester, everything shifted when I met Cindy Albee. Little did I know this chance encounter would change the course of my life. Cindy and I met during a political science class project. From the moment I saw her, I couldn't imagine someone like her noticing me. At 5'6", with striking blonde hair and a curvy figure, she naturally attracted attention, especially from the athletes. She casually dated some of them, but nothing seemed serious. My chance to get to know her came when our professor divided us into groups for a project, and Cindy ended up in mine. Despite my initial hesitations about group work, as I'd dealt with unreliable teammates before, her presence completely changed my perspective. Cindy's goal was to become a school teacher and eventually move into educational administration. She explained that both of her parents had been teachers and later principals, and many of their former students spoke highly of them. Inspired by this, she wanted to follow in their footsteps. Her parents had always taught her that learning something new each day was essential, and I fully agreed, as it mirrored the lessons my parents had instilled in me. My family owned a small farm and had 6 kids. My parents were always looking for ways to save money. My father believed it was better to solve problems yourself than pay someone else to do it. Now, in college, I was learning as much as I could from my professors, and also figuring out how to pay for tuition. My parents couldn't afford my education, so I chose engineering because I was good at math and science, and it seemed like a practical path to support myself. I worked part-time tutoring for the city, putting in about 20 hours a week. Although I still needed student loans, the job helped reduce them. I had dreams of designing beautiful buildings, but over time, I let go of that dream and pursued a new one. But more on that later. I first met Cindy when we were put into the same group for a political science class project. I had noticed her on the first day, but never thought she would be interested in me. She was gorgeous, 5 and 6 inches with a curvy figure and long blonde hair. There was something about her that made everyone want to be around her. The athletes and cool guys always flocked to her. She dated a few of them, but never seemed serious with anyone. About halfway through the semester, our political science professor told us he was dividing the class into 5 groups of 6 for a project. At first, I was skeptical. I'd had bad experiences with group projects in high school where a couple of people usually slacked off. But when Cindy was assigned to my group, my attitude quickly changed. "Hi, I'm Cindy Brandon," she said, offering her hand. I'm Todd Anderson," I stammered. "You don't sound too sure of that," Cindy laughed. I didn't want to look dumb, so I quickly pulled out my wallet and glanced at my driver's license. No, I'm definitely Todd Anderson," I grinned, showing her my ID. She laughed, and from that moment, our relationship began. In political science, we had to dissect a famous Supreme Court case assigned by the professor. We were tasked with explaining the case, discussing the decision, and defending our opinion. We got Marbury v. Madison, the first major case where the Supreme Court issued a ruling that shaped its power. The decision established that the court couldn't become more powerful than the legislative or administrative branches, shaping it into what it is today. As it turned out, the other 4 members of our group were unreliable. 3 were on the soccer team, and the 4th dropped out just before the semester ended. Cindy and I ended up doing all the research and writing ourselves. I should have been annoyed, but I wasn't. I was thrilled to spend more time with Cindy. We clicked so well that we started dating and soon became exclusive. I didn't date much in high school or college since I didn't have much money, but that didn't matter to Cindy. She loved simple things like watching TV with me, taking walks, having picnics, or visiting museums. Those were our big dates. I fell hopelessly in love with Cindy, and she seemed just as in love with me. We got married right after graduation. The first 5 years of our marriage were mostly wonderful. Our home was small, but had everything we needed. And since we moved into a new neighborhood, we quickly made friends and enjoyed a fun social life. Cindy got a job teaching 8th grade at a middle school in northern Palm Beach County, and I started working for a major engineering firm in South Florida. However, over time, I realized I didn't enjoy engineering. As a junior engineer, I was stuck with the least interesting projects. To distract myself from the monotony, I enrolled in a master's program, hoping that once I earned my degree, my salary would increase, and I'd get more exciting assignments. But all I got for my efforts was a $500 bonus. I was disappointed, but thought, to hell with them. I'll keep working and aim for a PhD. Other than the dullness of my job, I couldn't complain much. Cindy's career was thriving, and we were deeply in love. Financially, we were stable, and we even began talking about having a baby. But as the saying goes, all good things must come to an end. The first setback was when my boss informed me I was being transferred from the design department to inspections. Even though my design tasks were already boring, inspections were even worse. The second piece of news, which initially seemed positive, was that Cindy was moving to a new school, West Jupiter High, to lead the guidance department. However, that promotion would later prove to be a disaster. The final blow was the appointment of Brock Turner as principal of Cindy's school. Brock was a former NFL player, charismatic, and larger than life. At first, I was impressed by him. Having played 5 seasons for 3 different teams, he was drafted by Dallas in the 3rd round as an inside linebacker but was traded after 2 seasons, which was odd given his solid performance. After bouncing between Seattle and Philadelphia, a career-ending injury cut his NFL run short. Brock then tried his hand at television, but it didn't pan out. He briefly worked at a regional bank, but disliked the office job, so he left. Eventually, he took a position as a PE teacher and soccer coach near Philadelphia, rising to assistant principal and head coach. Though his team did okay, they never made the postseason. After 3 years, he applied for and got the job as principal at Cindy's school. At first, I talked about Brock more than Cindy. I was fascinated by his larger-than-life personality and NFL background, but that changed quickly after meeting him. I found him arrogant and self-centered. His wife, April, on the other hand, was the opposite, charming, intelligent, and a bit shy. She was also stunningly beautiful, reminding me of a smaller, more elegant Whitney Houston. I couldn't figure out what someone like April saw in a guy like Brock. Most of the staff at Cindy's school adored Brock, including my wife. I tried to warn Cindy that her boss was a womanizer, but she just laughed and teased me. "You're jealous," she said, hugging me. "Yeah, maybe I am. He's bigger than me, tougher than me, and he's an NFL star," I joked. "You don't have to be jealous," Cindy reassured me, pulling me close. "He may have played in the NFL, but I married you." Even though Cindy calmed me down, I couldn't shake the feeling that Brock was trouble. He seemed to be everywhere, and despite my discomfort, Cindy dragged me to every school event, where we often found ourselves with Brock and April. At these gatherings, I had the chance to talk to April and learned more about her life. She was a part-time instructor at the local community college, teaching French and German, while pursuing a PhD in comparative studies, hoping to secure a full-time assistant professor role. As time passed, I noticed Brock becoming more brazen, especially around Cindy. Everything came to a head during a school district Christmas party. Brock asked Cindy to dance without even glancing at me to check if I was okay with it. They danced for 3 songs in a row, with Brock holding her a little too close for my liking. Meanwhile, I found myself deep in conversation with April, who shared stories about their young daughter, Tiffany. By the time Brock and Cindy returned, I hadn't realized how much time had passed. However, Brock's demeanor shifted when he saw me talking to April. "You're in my shoes," he growled at me. Shocked by his tone, I stood up and asked, "Can I get anyone a drink?" April smiled and asked for a Chardonnay, while Cindy requested a soda. As I returned with the drinks, Brock grabbed my arm and snatched the wine glass from my hand. "Stay away from my wife, or I'll kick your back," he muttered. "What's your problem, man?" I asked, shocked by his behavior. "Just stay the hell away from my wife," he said, turning away. A few minutes later, Brock suddenly announced that he and April were leaving. His declaration was abrupt, and Cindy looked at me, clearly confused. On the drive home, Cindy immediately confronted me. "What did you do to upset Brock?" she demanded. "I didn't do a damn thing," I replied, frustrated. "You must have done something," Cindy insisted. "He was really mad at you." "He threatened to knock me on my A if I didn't stay away from April. I was just being polite and keeping her company while you two were dancing without even checking if I was okay with it." "What's that supposed to mean?" Cindy asked, annoyed. "Forget it," I said through gritted teeth. "I'm done talking about Brock freaking Turner." After that Christmas party, my dislike for Brock turned into outright contempt. Still, I didn't want to stir up trouble. especially since he was Cindy's boss. Thankfully, after the incident, Cindy rarely brought up Brock. About 3 months after New Year's, the economy tanked, especially in the commercial and residential real estate sectors. At first, it didn't affect my company because we had plenty of work, but soon people started getting nervous as new orders stopped coming in. I kept my head down, knowing that layoffs would come if things didn't turn around. One day, Cindy came home excited. "I've been chosen to organize a career assembly at school." I didn't see why she was so thrilled, since the only thing that would excite the students was getting out of class for a few periods. Still, Cindy was overjoyed to be in charge, and I gave her my full support. If I had known Brock picked her for the task, I wouldn't have been as eager to help, but in the end, it was good that I did. Cindy had already lined up an accountant, a lawyer, a nurse, a computer programmer, and other professionals. Then she asked me, "Can you get someone from your firm to give a short presentation?" The next day I asked my supervisor, and after it was passed up the chain, I got the answer. "If you want to take a personal day, you can go." Since it was to help Cindy, I agreed. The assembly was set to last 2 hours, with 12 professionals given 10 minutes each to talk about their fields. However, on the day of the event, 4 speakers either canceled or didn't show up. Cindy was furious and nearly in tears. "Don't worry," I told her. "I'll cover for the accountant, lawyer, mechanic, and doctor." When my turn came, I kissed Cindy and reassured her, "Don't stress." As I walked onto the stage, I saw a crowd of high school students looking bored out of their minds. The only reason they hadn't left was that they'd have to go back to class. While my slides were being loaded, I started my presentation. "Good afternoon. If you're asleep, raise your hand." Sure enough, most hands went up, and the students laughed. I knew I had their attention. "I hope what I'm about to share interests you, but if not, at least it'll keep you out of class for a bit longer." The students clapped. Taking a deep breath, I began. "I'm an engineer, but I'm going to talk about 4 or 5 different professions. I'll also give you some tips on how to succeed in whatever you do, including how to finish high school with less stress." The students laughed again, but many sat up straighter. I was getting into a groove. "You probably think engineers are all nerds, but that's not true. Let me tell you a story about how practical engineers are." I then told my story. One day, an engineering student was riding his new bike across campus. He ran into a friend, also an engineer, who said, "Nice bike. Where'd you get it?" "Well, the weirdest thing happened," said the first student. "A girl rode up to me, got off her bike, stripped off all her clothes, and told me I could take whatever I wanted." "Wow," said the second student. "Good call. Her clothes probably wouldn't have fit you anyway." I added, "As you can see, engineers are practical." The room erupted in laughter. I then moved on to my slideshow, featuring unique buildings and structures. One building had a roof shaped like a rolled-up carpet. Another, called the Crooked House, looked like it leaned in several directions at once. I even showed a building shaped like a giant picnic basket. At the end of the slides, I displayed a 9-story building with no name and asked, "Can anyone guess what's special about this building?" After a few guesses, I finally said, "You'll never figure it out. This is the largest brothel in Europe. It's 9 stories tall and located in Germany, in case you were wondering." The boys cheered while the girls let out disgusted yucks at my comment. I kept going, moving from one profession to the next, explaining the average salary and required education for each. I mixed in jokes and gave tips on how to study and pass tests. "If you want to succeed at anything," I said, "you've got to push yourself beyond what you think you can do. It might sound counterintuitive, but if you don't challenge your limits, how can you ever improve?" The students seemed interested, so I continued. "There's no such thing as a stupid question. The only dumb thing is not asking for help when you need it." I also briefly addressed those not planning to go to college. "If you're considering a trade, go for it," I encouraged. "You might even end up making more money than most college graduates." I was enjoying myself and didn't realize I'd gone over my time until Cindy gave me a frantic signal to wrap it up. Nodding, I closed with one last piece of advice. As you go through life, each of you will have to give a public speech at some point. It's one of the biggest fears people have, sometimes even bigger than the fear of end. When that time comes, remember, stand up straight so people can see you, speak loudly so they can hear you, and keep it short so they can appreciate you. "Thank you. You've been great," I finished. To my surprise, I got a standing ovation. Cindy kissed me and Brock awkwardly patted my hand, but it didn't stop there. 3 principals from other schools approached me, asking if I could give a similar speech at their schools. I explained, "I took a personal day to speak here, and I did it to help my wife." Cindy, however, convinced me to speak at the other schools. Each went well, and after the last one, at a high school in a poorer area, the principal offered me a teaching job. At the time, I felt on top of the world, but soon that feeling would fade. One Monday morning, my supervisor called me into his office. "We're making cuts," he said, "and unfortunately your position is being eliminated." The severance package was fair, including 3 months' pay and health insurance. But when I told Cindy, her first reaction was, "Great, how are we going to pay the mortgage now?" I just stared at her and said, "Thanks for the encouragement." I grabbed a beer from the fridge and went to the den, where I started job hunting on the computer. A few minutes later, Cindy came in looking apologetic. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm just scared we might lose the house." I kissed her forehead. "Don't worry, I've got 3 months of severance. I'll find something before it runs out." But as my severance ran out, I still hadn't found a job, and the pressure from Cindy kept building. With each rejection, the tension at home grew, and I started feeling more like a failure. Then something happened that made things worse. Alan Latter, the vice principal at West Jupiter High, took a job in California and left in 2 weeks. Brock quickly promoted Cindy to take his place. From that moment on, I had to endure constant talk about how Mr. Turner was beloved by the students, praised by the teachers, and even being considered for deputy superintendent. My dislike for Brock hit its peak as my unemployment dragged into the 4th month. I couldn't shake the feeling that Cindy was losing respect for me. But then, an unexpected opportunity came up. One evening, while watching the news, I saw a story about a new program aimed at recruiting teachers for low-income schools. The program focused on candidates' life experience rather than requiring a teaching certificate, though new hires would need to get certified within 2 years. The starting salary was $3,000 higher than normal for new teachers. Since I hadn't found work in my field, I decided to give it a shot. The next morning, I faxed my resume to the school board, and by noon, I had an interview set for the following day. I didn't tell Cindy because I didn't want to get her hopes up. The interview went well, and to my surprise, I got a job offer. As soon as my resume hit the system, they found a video of one of my career day speeches, which fast-tracked my application. They offered me a job at Riviera High School, the worst-performing school in the district, located in the economically struggling Riviera Beach area. Despite the town's fancy name, it was anything but upscale. Worst of all, Riviera High ranked last out of 58 high schools in the county, with only 6% of its seniors being college-ready. Still, I accepted the job to teach math and science. That evening, I excitedly told Cindy about my new position, expecting her support. Instead, she looked horrified. "I don't want you taking that job," she said. "It's too dangerous." She shared horror stories about the school, metal detectors at every entrance, guards patrolling the halls, and 3 teachers being attacked the previous year, with one even stabbed. "You don't know anything about teaching," she added. "You won't last a week." Despite Cindy's warnings and the frightening stories from other teachers, I showed up nervous but determined on my first day. The school's condition didn't ease my nerves. It was an old, poorly maintained building with graffiti covering parts of the outside and even the interior walls. Students wandered the halls like they owned the place, and security guards were posted near every restroom. I decided to keep a low profile at first, avoiding conflict and focusing on simple math and science games. The games were fun, but they also taught the students the key concepts they needed to pass their tests. By the end of the year, the school's academic performance had improved slightly, thanks in part to Principal Ben Carlson, a no-nonsense figure with a commanding presence, who maintained order with strict policies. Not only did I survive the first week, but by December, I was thriving. I revamped my lesson plans to include more engaging games, which the students loved. Other teachers began using some of my methods, and by the end of the year, Riviera High improved its ranking from 58th to 51st in the county. I was even nominated for Teacher of the Year, though I didn't win. Despite these successes, Cindy wasn't impressed. She kept asking when I'd stop wasting time and get back into engineering. Finally, I told her, "I'm not going back to engineering. I love teaching." She wasn't thrilled, but seemed to reluctantly accept my decision. During the Christmas break, I made a big choice. I decided to pursue a PhD, something I hadn't been able to do because of the downturn in the economy. I wasn't as interested in engineering anymore, but I'd always been passionate about computers. So I set my sights on a PhD in computer science. I remembered from a conversation with April nearly a year earlier that she was working toward a PhD in comparative studies at Florida Atlantic University, FAU. I looked into FAU's programs and decided to enroll in their computer engineering PhD program. I spent another year teaching at Riviera High School, where the academic scores improved further, raising the school's rank from 51st to 46th in the county. Meanwhile, the school board approved Cindy's appointment as vice principal at West Jupiter High School. But then everything changed. That summer, Brock was promoted to deputy superintendent, and Cindy was nominated to become the principal of West Jupiter High. I was relieved that Brock's new role meant his office would be at district headquarters, so Cindy wouldn't see him daily, though she still had to make weekly trips there. I wasn't happy about it, but I understood it was part of her job. At the same time, I continued attending classes at FAU, which was about 40 minutes away. Since April also attended FAU, I offered to carpool with her. She thought it was a great idea, but when she told Brock, he became furious. He even called me, threatening, "If you ever drive my wife anywhere, I'll kick your A." I didn't expect such hostility, but I was disappointed because I enjoyed talking with April during the commute. Despite Brock's jealousy, April and I became good friends over the months. We often grabbed coffee together during breaks between classes. Most of the time, we were joined by other classmates, but occasionally it was just the two of us. Our conversations grew deeper, covering everything from our studies to personal challenges. One evening after class, I was sitting in the cafeteria when April arrived with a few classmates. I had already bought her a coffee, knowing she'd be there soon. When she saw me, she smiled and said, "You didn't have to do that, Jacob." "No problem," I said with a grin. "I've been here for about 15 minutes, and I figured your class would be out soon." April sat down and took a sip of her coffee. "Your class ended early?" "Yeah," I replied. "The teacher got sick." April was quiet for a moment, then opened up. "I envy you, Jacob. I should be further along in my PhD by now, but Brock hasn't made it easy for me. Now he's pressuring me to have another baby in hopes of having a boy. But if I do, it'll set my PhD back by years. I wouldn't have a shot at landing a full-time position as an assistant professor." "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him I wouldn't have another baby until I got my doctorate. He wasn't happy," she said, glancing at her phone. "Damn, my phone's dead. I need to let Brock know I'm staying late to meet with my counselor." "Do you really think that's a good idea?" I asked carefully. April thought for a second, then sighed. "You're right. No point in poking the bear." She borrowed a phone from one of her classmates, Amy, and after a short call with Brock, she hung up, muttering, "Damn." "Everything okay?" I asked. "No," she said, frustrated. "His voicemail is full again. I've been telling him for days to clear it out, but he hasn't." "Need me to do anything?" I offered. April hesitated, then pulled out a note from her backpack. "Would you mind dropping this off at my house? Just tell Brock I tried to call, but his voicemail is full, and I asked you to deliver this." Although I wasn't eager to visit Brock, I agreed. "Sure, I'll do it." As I turned onto Turner Street, where Brock lived, I was surprised to see Cindy's Volkswagen parked in his driveway. I couldn't think of any reason why Cindy would be there, and my mind started racing with unsettling possibilities. I parked on the street, feeling a growing sense of unease. I tried to convince myself there was a logical explanation for Cindy being there, but nothing reasonable came to mind. I decided to take a look around the house. The lights were on downstairs, and most of the windows didn't have curtains drawn. I slowly made my way to the side of the house and peeked into the first window. It was the living room, but no one was there. The next room I checked was the kitchen, which was also empty. However, when I rounded the back of the house, I found a window with partially open curtains. What I saw inside shook me to my core. Brock and my wife Cindy were in an embrace that left no doubt about what was going on. In that moment, I had the presence of mind to pull out my phone and start recording. I watched the scene unfold, feeling paralyzed, unable to move or think clearly. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled back to my car and drove to a nearby parking lot. There, I screamed in anguish, pounding the steering wheel in rage. "How could Cindy betray me like this?" I yelled repeatedly. We had talked about having kids, and now here she was, cheating on me with the man I despised most. As the initial shock wore off, my anger grew like never before. I knew my marriage was over. The only question was how much pain I could inflict on them both. I had the video, but I knew it wouldn't matter if they truly loved each other. Revenge, however, was all I could think about at that moment. Then my thoughts turned to April. I remembered Brock bragging once that if they ever divorced, he'd leave her with nothing. I felt a strong urge to warn her. Without hesitation, I drove back to FAU, determined to tell her everything. When I arrived on campus, I spotted April's car still in the parking lot. I waited anxiously until she came out about 10 minutes later. The moment she saw me, she looked concerned. "Jacob, what's wrong?" she asked, clearly sensing my distress. "Did something happen to Brock or Tiffany?" I shook my head. "No, April. Physically, they're fine, but I have something difficult to tell you." Her expression turned confused. "What is it?" "Your husband," I began, my voice heavy with emotion, "and my wife. They're having an affair." April's face went pale, and her tone sharpened. "That's not funny, Jacob." "I'm not joking," I said gravely. "I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes and videotaped it." April's hands started trembling, and she dropped her bag and purse to the ground. I picked them up for her and gently said, "We need to talk. I need to show you this." I led her to my car, pulled out my phone, and played the video. April didn't make it through the whole recording before she broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I knelt beside her, taking the phone from her shaking hands. "I know this is a lot to take in," I said softly, "but I've already made up my mind. I'm divorcing Cindy. From what Brock said during the video, it sounds like he's planning to hide his assets before divorcing you." April looked confused. "I didn't hear that," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll play it again," I replied. This time, as she watched, April's shock turned to fury. "I've heard rumors about Brock over the years, but I never believed them. If he thinks he's going to run off with your wife and leave me behind, he's got another thing coming." April realized what she had said and quickly apologized. "I'm sorry for that comment about your wife." "It's okay. You just called it like it is," I replied. After making sure April was okay with going home, I sent her a copy of the video. Then I headed home myself. By the time I got there, Cindy was either asleep or pretending to be. I didn't care. I went to the den, turned on my computer, and started planning the end of my marriage. The next day, after Cindy left around 8:30 a.m., I'd already showered and was ready to sort out our finances. Before heading out, I found a divorce attorney online and scheduled an appointment for the following day. Cindy and I didn't have many assets. Our house had little equity, so it would either be sold or she could buy me out. We had joint accounts totaling about $75,000 and 2 retirement accounts. Cindy's with the Florida retirement system and mine, a 401k. Until recently, our retirement funds had been about equal. I figured splitting everything would be straightforward, but I'd have to wait until I talked to the attorney. I already knew Florida was a no-fault state, so the video wouldn't help legally, but it might pressure Cindy to sign the divorce papers if she wanted to fight. By 10 a.m., I had packed up what I could and started looking for an apartment. I found a studio in Lake Park and rented it. Afterward, I went home to finish packing my belongings. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I realized the studio wouldn't hold all my stuff, so I rented a nearby storage unit. If Cindy noticed my things were disappearing, she didn't say a word. I stayed in the den, preparing for a potential new job. I slept on the couch while Cindy left the house before I woke up. The next day, I met with the divorce attorney, Alicia Smithson. She was a no-nonsense woman who didn't tolerate excuses. After I explained what was happening and showed her the video, she confirmed that the footage wouldn't help in court. She also warned me not to post it online, saying I could face legal trouble if I did. That evening, I waited for Cindy to come home, wanting to confront her. She rushed in around 9 p.m. and brushed past me as I sat in the living room. "Cindy, we need to talk," I called out. "I'm tired, and I want a shower," she said, heading upstairs. "I need to talk to you right now," I shouted, which made her freeze at the foot of the stairs. She turned and demanded, "What the hell are you talking about?" "Come here, and I'll show you," I said, standing up. Cindy cautiously walked into the living room. "I think you owe me an apology for how you just spoke to me," I said. When she didn't respond, I opened my laptop and played the video. She only watched a few seconds before slamming the lid shut. "I guess now that you've found out, I don't have to hide it anymore," Cindy said without a trace of remorse. I chuckled. "Cindy, remember when you said people should learn something new every day?" "Yeah, so what?" she snapped. "Well, apparently you didn't learn when I warned you about Brock. Now he's made you his plaything." "There's no need to be so blunt," Cindy said angrily. "I know it hurts your ego, but a better man took me from you. I was hoping we could part as friends." I laughed out loud. "Since you refuse to see the truth, you're on your own. I've already rented an apartment and moved most of my things there. You can stay in this house until the divorce. It'll either be sold or you can buy me out. You'll be served with papers at work on Friday." I moved into my small, cramped apartment. When you love someone as much as I loved Cindy, it's devastating. The first couple of days I could barely get out of bed, only forcing myself up to use the bathroom or find something to eat. Thankfully, it was summer, and I didn't have anywhere to be. My mind was consumed with thoughts of how to get back at them both, but I couldn't think of anything. By the third day, I forced myself to get up, take a shower, and go grocery shopping. When I got back, I turned on the small TV in the kitchen, and a celebrity scandal show immediately caught my attention. Former NFL halfback Brock Turner and his wife are divorcing after 3 years of marriage. Rumors of Brock being a womanizer were confirmed when his wife, April, filed for divorce citing infidelity. Our reporter spoke with Mr. Turner today. "Mr. Turner, is it true your wife caught you with another woman?" Brock smiled sadly. "My wife and I are going through a tough time. We're working through a misunderstanding, and we'd appreciate privacy as we try to strengthen our marriage." I didn't feel much satisfaction. I hadn't spoken to April since finding out what her husband was doing with my wife. It seemed unfair that Brock had ruined my marriage, and for all I knew, he and April were reconciling. I felt anger and sadness again, but when the phone rang, fear set in. Before I could say hello, Brock started. "Listen, fool, I know you're the one who took those pictures of me with my promiscuous wife. Just so you know, I'm living in your house and entertaining her. Watch the 6 o'clock news tonight because your A is grass." I was shocked Brock had called me, but it didn't take a genius to figure out I'd made the video. As intimidating as he was, I wasn't going to let him know he scared me. "Well, you're in luck because Cindy will soon be my ex-wife," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "And if you're living there, I guess you didn't resolve that misunderstanding. Just watch the 6 o'clock news, you fool. You won't be so smug after that," he snapped before hanging up. I wondered what Brock could possibly do to me and turned on the local news at 6. About 10 minutes in, the anchor announced, "Palm Beach County Superintendent Standish Crawford resigned today to take a position with the Department of Education. Deputy Superintendent Brock Turner has been named interim superintendent, with speculation that the position will be offered to him permanently." A cold fear gripped me. Now I understood what Brock meant. He was my boss. As superintendent, he could make my life miserable, or worse, set me up for some scandal. I needed to get out from under his control. At first, I considered quitting and going back to engineering, but the economy was just starting to improve, and I needed income to pay my bills and divorce attorney. Cindy's lawyer made outrageous demands, like insisting I buy out half her share of the house for $50,000. If there had been $20,000 in equity, it would have been a great deal, and I'd be entitled to half. She also demanded I drop infidelity as a reason for divorce and accused me of hiding money, requesting I pay for a forensic accountant to investigate our finances. Despite how ridiculous it all was, I still had to pay Alicia, my attorney, to defend me. Panic set in until I remembered April mentioning the college where she worked was still looking for adjunct faculty. I immediately called the college's HR department, who directed me to their website to apply. After reviewing my qualifications, they hired me to teach algebra, pre-calculus, and calculus on a 1-year contract at about 80% of my high school salary. Teaching at the college turned out to be much more rewarding than high school. At the high school, it always felt like I was trying to come up with new ways to engage students who didn't care about their futures. At the college, the students genuinely wanted to learn, and if I made it interesting, they eagerly participated. 2 weeks into the job, I ran into April in the cafeteria. She seemed just as happy to see me as I was to see her. We had lunch together and caught up. April told me that Brock was dragging out their divorce, even filing for sole custody of their daughter, Tiffany. However, the video of him with my wife convinced the judge he wasn't fit for primary custody. "My divorce is taking forever, too," I admitted, "but it looks like it's finally nearing the end." April pushed her sandwich aside. "I still can't believe I bought into Brock's lies for so long," she said, shaking her head. "He has a way of making everything sound so believable." "He must be one hell of a talker to convince my wife to get involved with him," I said bitterly. "Cindy always said people should learn something new every day. I could have done without that lesson." April squeezed my hand. "I'm so sorry this happened to you, Todd. You're one of the kindest people I know." From that day, April and I started having lunch together regularly, which eventually led to dinners and other dates. I found myself falling for her, but I didn't want to risk ruining our friendship. Still, I wanted more. One day over lunch, I took a chance. "There's a circus in town this weekend," I said casually. "I was thinking of going." I was planning to take Tiffany, but she might not be up for it, April replied sadly. She still doesn't understand why her daddy doesn't want to see her. He told me that if I go through with the divorce, he'll pay child support, but won't have anything to do with her. No offense, but Brock is a Class A idiot, I said with venom, then smiled gently. But if you want to go, I'm sure the two of us can talk a 4-year-old into it. The day at the circus was a huge success. There wasn't just the circus. There was also a small fair. By the end of the day, April was holding one of my hands. Tiffany had a firm grip on the other, and with her free hand, she clutched a stuffed unicorn I had won for her. When we got to their house, I walked them to the door and leaned in to kiss April on the cheek. To my surprise, she pulled me in and kissed me on the lips. I wrapped my arms around her and kissed her back. As we pulled away, I felt a tug on my pants. I want a kiss too, Tiffany demanded, lifting her arms to me. I picked her up and kissed her cheeks. Thank you for letting me come with you and your mom today, I said, and thank you for being such a good girl. Tiffany beamed at the praise. As I was about to set her down, April asked, Do you want to stay for dinner? It's nothing fancy, just Tiffany's favorite, spaghetti. I love spaghettis, I said, still holding Tiffany, and I'd love to have dinner with you lovely ladies. Dinner was lively. Tiffany got more tomato sauce on her face and hands than in her mouth, giggling every time she slurped a noodle. Afterward, she took a bath and then asked me to read her a story. I ended up reading 2, using different voices for all the characters, which she loved. She refused to go to bed without a goodnight kiss. Once Tiffany was asleep, April and I sat on the couch, sipping wine and talking about work. Suddenly, she set down her glass, took mine, and placed it on the table. What happened next was inevitable. We got closer, and one thing led to another. From that night on, we grew very close, but we decided not to move in together until both of our divorces were final. My divorce was finalized first. I felt relieved when the final court date arrived. I was in the courtroom when Cindy walked in, arm in arm with Brock. She smiled smugly at me, gripping his hand tightly, while he smirked, especially after kissing her before taking his seat. I'd convinced April to stay away, knowing Brock would be there. The judge simply asked both lawyers if everything was settled, and when they agreed, he banged the gavel. Just like that, I was divorced. April's divorce took nearly 3 more months to finalize, but during that time, we both earned our doctorates. Shortly after, April was promoted to associate professor. Although I wasn't offered a full faculty position, I was given a 2-year teaching contract, the first of its kind at the college, where they had never offered more than a 1-year contract. My classes had become so popular that there was now a waiting list, and I was even asked to teach an additional pre-calculus course due to demand. I was earning 25% more than I had as a high school teacher and had been promised an assistant professor position in the near future. Things were going better than I had ever imagined. But April and I faced a turning point when I had to attend a 3-day seminar in Atlanta. The sessions ran all day, with only 5-minute breaks every hour. In the evenings, there were group discussions that went late into the night. By the time each day ended, I was exhausted, collapsing into bed and starting over the next morning. I had explained the schedule to April, and she understood, but Tiffany didn't. She couldn't grasp why I hadn't called or why I had disappeared. When I finally returned, she practically jumped on me the moment I walked in the door, crying because I had left. I tried to explain where I had been, but she didn't calm down until I gave her a pink stuffed dragon I had brought back for her. One of her favorite books was about rainbow dragons, and her favorite character was the pink one named Pinky. When I gave her the dragon, she squealed with joy and covered my face with kisses. Once Tiffany had calmed down, we sat for dinner. Out of nowhere, she turned to me and asked, "Why don't you live here? I want you to be my daddy." I glanced at April, who was smiling, and replied, "I'd love to be your daddy, but I don't know what your mom would say about that." April, still smiling, added, "Her mom would say she'd be thrilled if you became Tiffany's dad. But there's a catch. You have to become my husband first." "Really?" I asked, surprised. "You're going to marry me? I thought you'd never ask." April giggled. We were married in a small ceremony with just a few close friends, my dad and April's mom. My mother had passed away when I was 9, and April's father had died when she was 15. I was happier than I had ever been. Sure, Cindy was with a former NFL player, but I had married the most beautiful woman I had ever known, and I now had a little girl I loved like my own. Throughout the divorce, Brock kept pursuing April, swinging between pleading and making veiled threats. However, he never crossed the line where the police could intervene. He was still living with Cindy, and from what I heard, she was over the moon. I almost felt sorry for her because eventually, Brock's true colors would show. When Cindy betrayed me, I was devastated and filled with rage, consumed by thoughts of revenge. But as I grew closer to April, those feelings faded. The desire for revenge disappeared. Yet fate had a way of giving me the upper hand. Shortly after April and I got married, we decided to sell her house and buy a new one closer to the college. We thought we'd try selling it ourselves, and within days, we were lucky enough to go under contract. Since Brock's name was still on the deed, he had to sign the contract. When April called him, he was thrilled to hear from her at first. But when she explained why she was calling, his mood shifted. Brock outright refused to sign the contract, being his usual stubborn self. April was ready for this. She calmly informed Brock that if he didn't want to sell the house, he'd have to buy her out according to their divorce settlement. Furious, he hung up the phone. However, the next day, Brock called back and grudgingly agreed to sign the contract. At the closing, April asked if he needed anything from the house. His response was cold. "I don't need anything. It's your problem to get the crap out." Clearing out the house turned into a massive job. We saved the basement for last, and that's where I struck gold. April brought up a box filled with what looked like junk, but at the bottom was an old laptop that had belonged to Brock. April explained that he had gotten a new laptop a couple of years after becoming principal at West Jupiter High, so she assumed he had discarded this one. April asked if I could fix it up for Tiffany to use, and I told her it shouldn't be a problem as long as it still worked. That night, after charging it, I was surprised to find that not only did the laptop work, but it was also full of files. I considered just reformatting it, but I figured it would be smart to check if there were any files April might want, like pictures of her and Tiffany. What I found, however, elevated Brock from a typical idiot to a world-class one. There were some pictures and videos of April and Tiffany, but there were far more of other women. Brock had meticulously organized these videos and photos, each labeled with a description of how he rated the woman. Most of the women were strangers to me, but 5 of them I recognized. One was the wife of a Dallas quarterback, a world-famous model. Not long after their encounter, that couple had split up, and Brock was traded soon after. Now I knew why. The other 4 women were teachers at West Jupiter High, and 2 of them were married. Yes, Cindy was one of them. There were multiple photos and videos of her, some far worse than the one I had taken. I couldn't believe how my loving wife had turned into such a person. What made me laugh, though, was Brock's notes about Cindy. He praised her for her skills, but complained she was too clingy, constantly begging him to get her pregnant. He even considered doing it just to spite me. Initially, I planned to delete everything, but then I realized this was my chance for a bit of revenge. So I downloaded all the incriminating files onto a flash drive and continued combing through the laptop. What I found next was even more shocking. Brock's financial records. He hadn't disclosed all his assets during the divorce. He had accounts in the Cayman Islands and California that weren't mentioned in the court documents. After going through the rest of the files, I called April over. First, I showed her the pictures of the women Brock had slept with, then his hidden financial records. I wasn't sure what angered her more, the women or the money. In the end, I think it was the women. Among them were her maid of honor, close girlfriends, and even her cousin. April was livid. She took Brock back to court for hiding marital assets. He could have faced jail time, but instead, the judge awarded her 65% of the hidden assets. A large chunk of that money went into a college fund for Tiffany, and the rest went toward a down payment on a new house 2 blocks from the college. With the divorce settlement and my minimal living expenses, I was able to save a decent amount. Combined with what I got from my divorce, I matched April's down payment on the new house. As for Brock's treasure trove of incriminating files, I hadn't yet decided what to do with his top 10 entertainment picks, but I kept the flash drive, waiting for the right moment. That moment came during a college fair at the convention center in West Palm Beach. I was one of the speakers, and April had canceled her classes to join me. The event featured around 40 colleges, with high school students from all over the area bussed in to meet with representatives. There were also seminars on applying to college, choosing majors, and academic success. I was sitting with our college rep when I heard a voice that made my blood boil. Brock Turner. "Look over here, Cindy," he said, smirking. "There's your loser ex-husband." "That's funny, Brock," I replied with a forced smile, "because that's exactly what your ex-wife says about you." "You're such an a-hole, Todd," Brock spat, his face reddening. "You're lucky I don't—" "Ignore him, Brock," Cindy interrupted, taking his hand. He's not half the man you are. Don't stoop to his level." Brock gave her a smug look and then leaned down to kiss her. She melted into his embrace, and when they pulled apart, he shot me a victorious grin. That's when I made my decision. As they turned to leave, I called out to Cindy, "Cindy, I found some pictures of you on an old computer. Thought you might want them. You always said people should learn something new every day." I handed her the flash drive. She muttered a quick thank you, unaware of what she now held. April had witnessed the entire exchange. She walked over to me, wrapped her arms around me, and kissed me softly. "I'm sorry I've been gone so long, honey," she said sweetly. "What the hell?" Brock blurted out, his face a mix of confusion and fury. His expression worsened when he noticed April's pregnant belly. "Oh, hi, Brock," April greeted him mockingly. "Catching up with my husband?" Brock stepped toward me, but quickly thought better of it as a guard walked by. He muttered something under his breath and stormed off with Cindy, glancing back at me several times, looking worried. That night, as April and I lay in bed, I gently rubbed lotion on her growing belly while we half listened to the news. We weren't paying much attention until the newscaster started a new story. The police were called to Superintendent Brock Turner's home this evening. While details are still emerging, it appears Mr. Turner sustained a non-life-threatening stab wound. His girlfriend, Cindy Albee, has been taken into custody. I looked at April with a grin. I guess Cindy learned something new today.